Welcome, everyone. Exciting day ahead of us. We're going to start out with 4 fantastic lectures this morning, and we begin with Loriliai Biernacki, who is going to be speaking about mantras, mental causality, information, and transcendence. Excuse me? Oh, different title. She'll tell you what her title is.
So I had to change the title just because it was going to be too long. So it's Mantras, Mental Causality, and the Science of the Sun. So I never cease to be astonished by the way that medieval Indian Tantric texts use miraculous, impossible feats of yogis in an altogether deadpan, matter-of-fact way to prove some unrelated, tangential philosophical argument. For instance, the 11th century Indian philosopher Abhinavagupta, discussing Utpaladeva's argument for the primacy of consciousness, cites the capacity of a yogi to create a city or an army. Yogis who can fly through the air, read other people's minds, hop into a dead body and bring it back to life, Indian thinkers routinely cite these with no fanfare, without even batting an eye. Called siddhi or vibhuti in the Sanskrit, for our world today, the 20th century yogi Yogananda offers a representative snapshot of the wild world of yogic powers in his autobiography of a yogi, first published in 1946. This 20th century classic caught the imagination of no less a tech visionary than Steve Jobs, who kept Yogananda's autobiography as one of the few books on his iPhone, and on his deathbed, he gave instructions to give the text out to all who came to his memorial as part of his funeral plans. We find in Yogananda's autobiography yogis who can be at 2 places at one time, yogis who can cause objects to mysteriously appear and disappear, yogis who can foretell the future and cure diseases, and even bring dead animals back to life. We will focus on one yogi whom Yogananda met, the yogi Vishuddhananda Paramahamsa, who fills only just a few short paragraphs in Yogananda's classic text as Gandha Baba, the perfume saint. Vishuddhananda was revered in his time as a master yogi, famed for his capacity to materialize objects. As Yogananda notes, on one occasion when he was requested by one of his followers, he materialized out-of-season tangerines. So there's no tangerines in the market, and he materializes them lodged inside a Bengali sweet. Vishuddhananda was born in 1853 in the village Bandol in Bengal, and he gathered a number of disciples during his time living in the holy city of Varanasi in the first part of the 20th century until he died in 1937. For our purposes here, I suggest that the limit case of the yogi who can directly, simply by the power of his or her mental concentration, affect the material world, as Vishuddhananda did with his widely known display of yogic powers, materializing tangerines, transforming a rose into a jasmine flower. This offers a compelling case study for parsing out the problem of mental causality. That is, what does it tell us about the relationship between the mind and the material world when a yogi, through the power of mind, can cause tangerines to appear inside of sweets? And he doesn't touch them either, by the way. John Searle's famous response to the question of mental causality, lifting his arm up as a display of the mind as free will, falls short, in that the yogi's wild interventions extend outside the yogi's own proper body. What is so interesting about Kaviraj's depiction of this yogi's impossible feat affecting material realities beyond the yogi's own body is that his model essentially rewrites the relationship between mind and matter through relying on a linguistic frame. Impossible materializations hinge on the idea of a modal shift between a first-person grammatical perspective and a third-person perspective. Language itself mediates the gap, and specifically the language of mantra operates to bridge between a first-person perspective indicative of consciousness, what we think of as the mind element of the mind-body split, and a third-person perspective indicative of matter, materiality as a third-person objective external reality. So given our time constraints, I can only really give you the punchline for my argument. I incorporate a more detailed analysis in a longer version of this paper, and I've also written elsewhere about the idea of bridging the gap between mind and matter in contemporary neuroscientific theory. This is an article that I've written here, Connecting Consciousness to Physical Causality, and this is related to a contemporary neuroscientist, Giulio Tononi, who's got this a new theory called integrated information theory. So I write about this, and I connect it to this idea that we see in Tantra. And I also have a new book out. I'll follow Stephen Finlay on this one, and promote the book. Came out in February. It's called The Matter of Wonder, and it's on Abhinavagupta's Panentheism and New Materialism. So in both of these, in the fourth chapter of this one, I talk a bit more about this idea of this use of first person and third person perspectives. Okay, so and in both of these cases, I draw on this idea of in this article in particular, the Panentheism article. But in both of them, I draw on this idea of information. So information is a really big word for us today, and I talk about how contemporary ideas, particularly with Tononi's work, draw on a double dipping of this notion of information as a solution to the mind-body problem. Okay, so in a longer version, I tie these together. Today, I won't have time to do this. Here, I'll focus on a particular method that Vishuddhananda taught for materializing objects, roses, tangerines, etc., what he called Surya Vijnana, the science of the sun, which relies on the mechanics of the use of mantra. The mantra, magical formulas, words, along with the rays of the sun, sunlight, to directly alter the physical, material substances of our world. Okay, so apart from Yogananda's brief mention of Swami Vishuddhananda in his autobiography of a yogi, what we know of Vishuddhananda especially comes from one famous disciple, the preeminent 20th century philosopher and scholar Gopinath Kaviraj. Mahamahopadhyaya Pandit Gopinath Kaviraj was a remarkable, highly respected scholar who won several of India's most prestigious scholarly awards, including the Padma Vibhushan Award, and was eventually featured on a postage stamp commemorating his scholarly contributions. This is Gopinath Kaviraj. And here's the postage stamp. Born in 1887 in Bengal, until his death in 1976, Kaviraj lived most of his life in Varanasi, writing voluminously on Indian philosophical traditions in English, in his native Bengali, and in Hindi, editing a major series publishing Sanskrit texts, the Saraswati Bhavana Granthamala, and serving for many years as the principal of the government Sanskrit College. Well known for his astute articulation of the doctrinal nuances of various Indian philosophical schools, Vedanta, Samkhya, Nyaya, and Tantra, I point out Kaviraj's pedigree primarily to attest that it would be difficult to accuse Kaviraj of being a docile, blind believer in the stigmatized trope of the fantastical yogi performing impossible miracles. Kaviraj's work, rather, is known for displaying a keen rigor of analysis. Kaviraj met Vishuddhananda in Varanasi and eventually produced both a sketch of Vishuddhananda's life and a detailed philosophical analysis of the principles behind Vishuddhananda's teaching of the sun science, that is, this way to materialize objects. As Kaviraj outlines it, these seemingly impossible feats of the yogi, specifically the capacity to materialize an object, a rose or a tangerine, it can be accomplished by two distinct methods, jnana and vijnana. The first term, jnana or knowledge, specifically draws on the capacity of the will, icha. This particular form of creating some new thing is how God creates the world, and the yogi also has this capacity to draw on the sheer power of will to create some new thing in the world. Vishuddhananda, however, as Kaviraj tells us, did not rely on icha, the power of his will. in his many displays of yoga. Instead, when questioned about yoga, he remarked that it was not yoga at all. That is, not jnana tied to the will, but rather vijnana, that is, the sun science, surya vijnana. Okay? This sun science involved Vishuddhananda channeling the rays of the sun, the rashmi of the sun, to generate the objects that he set out to materialize. We hear about Vishuddhananda as well from the well-known British journalist Paul Brunton, who wrote about his encounter with the sage Ramana Maharshi in South India. Astonished at seeing Vishuddhananda temporarily revive a dead bird using a simple magnifying glass to channel the rays of the sun aimed at the dead bird's eye, Brunton questioned him about the technique. Vishuddhananda remarked to Brunton that it was not yoga, but sun science at work. Vishuddhananda set out to institutionalize this remarkable method of material transformation. Again, not yoga, but a science that would be democratic and available even to those who did not have the discipline to develop the willpower of the advanced yogi. Kaviraj told Brunton of Vishuddhananda's bold democratic plans to build a special building with precisely colored glass windows, red and yellow and blue and so on, made of exact dimensions and with precise materials. These he had designed and placed on order to come from Europe. With these, he would build a system to use his methods working with the rays of the sun transported through colored glass to accomplish the impossible. This was in the early 1930s when Europe was in disarray. The worldwide economic problems and beginnings of what would become World War II meant Vishuddhananda's orders of specially manufactured glass materials were not to be delivered before he died. Okay, so the next section, sun signs. Of course, even a few people getting a hold of this technique and mastering it would likely revolutionize the world. It was not to be. Kaviraj, in any case, outlined in his writings the basic techniques behind Vishuddhananda's fabulous sun science underpinning his impossible materialization of objects. The basic principle, as Kaviraj points out in his transcriptions of conversations with Vishuddhananda, follows a well-known dictum of Tantra, that is, everything has the nature of everything else. As Abhinavagupta's great-grand guru, the 10th century Kashmiri philosopher Somananda phrases it, all entities being aware of their own nature exist as all others. All entities consist of everything, since everything is of the nature of everything else. Everything exists here as everything by having the nature and form of all the various entities. The clay pot has my nature, and I have that of the clay pot. End of the quote. Vishuddhananda offers a congruent explanation, telling us, within each category of things in the world, the full compass of all categories of matter is actually present. Each and everything that's the end of the quote there. Each and everything contains within it the essence of every other thing. One quality within any material object is predominant. So with that particular quality, we get a rose, for instance. However, the yogi can see and bring to the fore other qualities, the quality of a jasmine flower in its place, and in this way transform the rose into a jasmine flower. No mere philosophical abstraction simply invoked for the sake of theological argument, Vishuddhananda meant this quite literally, turning a rose into a jasmine flower, as Kaviraj, astonished, tells us, seeing this with his own eyes. What is especially interesting for our purposes here, that it is not simply a science of refracting rays of light through colored glass in a specially prepared building, a sun science lab that can generate the creation of some new thing. As Kaviraj details the process, it involves as well the power of language, and specifically language as mantra, a potent form of language that performatively generates what it signifies. This dual mechanism hinges on the double meaning of the word varna. Varna, the Sanskrit word meaning color, also used to classify the traditional four categories of caste in India, it also designates the letters of the alphabet. In Tantric context, the letters of the alphabet as Varna take on monumental significance. Kaviraj draws in particular on a Tantric concept known as the Shadadvan, the sixth paths. In this conceptual framework, the universe takes two different routes. On the one side, we find the Vachika, literally the speaker, that is the subjective perspective. And on the other side, we have the Vachya, the object, which entails the material world. In one way, not so radically different from Descartes' res cogitans and res extensa, with mind on one side and matter on the other, this tantric bifurcation of the world into subjective and material objective trajectories nevertheless differs from Descartes' precisely in that both mind and matter are framed within language. On the side of subjectivity, the Vachika, the most elemental form of subjectivity is Varna, the basic element of words as letters. Here for Kaviraj, the homology of the word Varna as both the letters of the alphabet and as color allows him to bridge the subjective perspective, Varna as Vachika, with the material side of reality, Varna as color. In this sense, the sun science can create new objects, bring new things into existence precisely because it can invoke both the subjective, intentional element of language through the letters of the alphabet and the objective material side of reality connected to the rays of the sun as light. Varna plays on both sides, as subject and as material object. Kaviraj tells us the secret to purifying the sixfold path, which adepts understood, is that the letters of the alphabet, the Varna, is always connected to Kala, the primary basis for the objective world. That is so, Kaviraj tells us, because speech and material object of speech are always joined, whatever has the authoritative control over the Varna, the letter, as primary element of subjectivity, that also takes control over Kala, the primary element of the objective material side of reality. This plays out particularly on the level of the color white, the Shukla Varna. The color white has a special capacity to shift across from the subjective side of reality to the objective side of reality. Varna as color, especially the color white, double dips as both the essence of the objective world and as the concentrated point of mantra. Here, Kaviraj offers us a remarkable instance of synesthesia, merging color with sound, and with this, tapping into the basis of consciousness. The term bindu, meaning a point, references a stage of mantra recitation where the energy of the sound, this sound, bindu comes at the end of the mantra, where the energy of the sound is congealed within a single dense point. This dense point, Kaviraj tells us, is the color white, emanating from the sun's rays. With this, the secret identity of the sun is indeed the primordial mantra, which is called the pranava, that is the sound Om. Light and color, then, are not different from sound, both as frequency as vibration. The transmutation of one into the other has to do with the shift between a third-person objective perspective as light, as color, and a first-person perspective as mantra, mantric sound. This dual mode shifting is key. As I noted earlier, I point out this same double dipping principle in other work on the concept of information for us in a contemporary neuroscientific theory dubbed Integrated Information Theory, IIT 3.0. In any case, Kaviraj tells us the sound Om, which is the sun, has two different states. One state entails the rays of the sun, and this state contains a multiplicity. This is the objective side of the world. The other state is where all the rays of the sun are absorbed into the heart, and that is the midpoint of the, this is a quote from Kaviraj, that is the midpoint of the bindu, the concentrated essence of the sound, end quote. This concentrated state of light absorbed inside the heart points to consciousness as a first-person perspective. This, he says, is the chidrupa, the form of consciousness, which is a category of light beyond color, varnatita. Creating something, Kaviraj points out, happens through an encounter. The word here he uses is sangarsha. It's a rubbing together where consciousness, chidrupa, in the heart rubs against the color white. This process unfolds from the color white. We get the color red first of all, and then the color blue. And blue color is the level on which manifestations first begin in the external world. Kaviraj maps out this essential synesthesia of light and sound in terms of a classical formulation of the language of mantra. So here's a quote from Kaviraj. He says, "The white color in reality is what the scriptures point to." You have this in here. "The white color in reality is what the scriptures point to as the principle of the bindu, the concentrated point that occurs at the end of the sound of the mantra. This is the moon's refracted point. That very thing is the kundalini, and it is the space of consciousness. That very color is the shabdamatrika, that is the goddesses that make up sound. By stirring this up, then you get sound and color both arise." So we have light, white light, containing all colors, which is a concealed form of mantra sound, and it's primarily the sound Om, particularly. And it is the space of consciousness, Chidakasha. This is the white light, which is the space of consciousness. And when it gets stirred up, it unfolds into the color red, and then blue, and then the yogi can create physical objects from this mix of sound mixed together with these colors of light. Tantra, of course, is known for its erudite homologies, mapping the elements of the senses and to the body and to the alphabet. And this might be taken for another synesthesia-prone symbolic system. Kaviraj, however, takes it a step beyond mere metaphysical speculation and offers up a specific example. He tells us how to materialize the material of camphor. You guys know what camphor is? It's just sort of this white, yeah. So he tells us how to materialize camphor through using the specific letters K, M, T, and R as rays of light yoked together in a specific order. Here, Kaviraj says that it's difficult to maintain the manifested form for a long period of time here in our physical world because the world has a natural propensity to go away, and one needs as well a yantra written out with code letters to help keep the camphor here where we can see it. Okay, what do we make of this impossible formulation? Even if we do not have the right colored glass or the exact process of placing the letters K, M, T, and R to make our own camphor here, what we may take away from this is our own need to rethink the roles of language and a first-person perspective in the play, the Leela of the Impossible. Okay, thanks. Okay.